Welcome back to the Start and Scale podcast. I'm your host, Jack Brandwood, and in this series, we're diving headfirst into the world of tech with the people who are coding the future from the front lines. This is the place where we refactor the way you think about scaling tech teams, debugging their journeys, reviewing their stories, and pushing boundaries to ship better insights. Whether you're a seasoned techie who's seen your fair share of legacy code, an aspiring professional ready to deploy your skills, or just fascinated by the world of technology, this episode will give you unique insights and practical takeaways to add to your backlog.
Got me my dream job at like 16, 17.
So grab your headphones, commit to this listen, and let's sprint into another episode. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Alex, thanks for coming to the podcast.
It's my absolute pleasure.
Wonderful. Look, I kind of pre-warned you that I do start these interviews with a little bit of a deep question. Who is Alex Lisle?
I suppose from a purely professional context, I'm CTO at Reality Defender, and I spent, 25 plus years building cybersecurity products. I started my life, I was a hacker, then did some time making computer games, and then went back to making cybersecurity products, and I haven't really stopped. So that's me.
And you're a Brit living in New York?
I am, yes. I am a Brit living in New York. I'm actually a dual citizen, but I've lived in America now for, I want to say 15 odd years, so for a while. So
I was walking around your office this morning, and I can't remember who it was that I met, but she was like, "Oh my God, there's so many British people in this office." Like, it was like Paul Revere was right. You know, the British are coming.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. New York in particular, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But even in Austin, like we are not at rest. I think that the when I first moved here, there was the British brain drain.
Oh yeah,
was like a thing, and I feel like it's just got worse as time has progressed.
How do you mean? What does that mean?
So the idea was like talented people from the UK would move from the UK. There was a big concern. This is 15 years ago, and I feel like it still seems to be a concern today. So
yeah, I think honestly it's the weather a lot of the time. Like it's not even the coldness, like the cold in the UK, because it gets super cold here. Obviously, it's just like the grey. You don't know what season it is.
You know what? Right, you say that, and when we moved to. So I lived in Durham, which I liked Durham a lot, but Durham was like 3 years of the 3 months of the year you just would stay indoors because it was just cold and miserable.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Austin, Texas, and someone asked what's the difference, and it's like you spend 3 months of the year indoors still. It's switched by 6 months. I found Texas weather far too hot, so I always find I miss seasons. So I do miss the British weather when you're not been there for a long time.
Sure.
But yeah, maybe.
Also, how British is the conversation? The fact that we went straight
to the weather. I was just thinking to say, hey,
my God,
there you go. So
also pre-warned you that I'm going to ask you to draw something. Obviously, you weren't always Alex Lisle of Reality Defender. What did you want to be when you grew up, and could you draw it for us?
So I draw it for you.
Yes.
I got lucky. I worked. I'm trying to think how you draw him now. It would be like he has to be blue, and he has to have very. Can't remember what his tail looks like, but there you go. And that would be Sonic. I want to be a computer game programmer.
Wow.
Yes. There you go. There's Sonic.
There you go. Evidence. Is that dream dead, or?
I got lucky in my career. I watched I'm dating myself. It's like the first thing I ever. My father bought like many children in the 80s in England. There was the con that they sold the parents to is like, don't buy them a console, buy them a microcomputer, and your kids will do it for homework. And so my kid bought an Amstrad. My father bought me an Amstrad CPC when I was very young, And the first thing I did was make computer games on it, right? Because that's what I think everyone does.
Uh-huh.
And then I watched a film called War Games, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so then I started to become a hacker. And then I was a hacker for a long time, and then, not a long time, for a fair few years, and then got caught hacking Beeb.com, which was then the BBC. And ironically, that got in the paper, and that got me my first job, which was at Sega, Dream Arena for Sega at the Dreamcast. And that got me into, so when I was at the age of like 16, 17, I got my dream job, which was working at Sega.
Through crime.
And I worked in computer games for not a huge amount of time, but I worked for Sega, I worked for Sony, I worked through, for Take-Two. And I found that working computer games turned me off from computer games. And even today, I do not have that passion anymore. But I did my dream job and I decided I didn't want it.
Well, I think everyone does that, right? Like people who like love yoga, for example, they go, I'm going to be a yoga instructor.
It's funny because like when we were in computer games, the motto at the time was never work on a game you love. Because you'll get sick of it. And I found that working in computer games, I would not want to turn on a games console. I mean, when I was at Sony and Sega, they give you free games, right? I mean, they give you these review copies of games. I'm sure they do it today, but like back then it was actual real media. And they used to sit there and I used to give them to friends because I'd be like, I've worked all day on fucking PS3. I don't want to turn my PS3 on. So like, it's one of those weird things. I used to write cybersecurity tools when I was working as a hobby. And nowadays my hobby is writing really volume rendering engines when I want to unwind. So like, it's just one of those weird things. There you go. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how your curiosity got you in a bit of trouble a bit more? Are we okay to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean,
I'm sure it's been taught to death, right? But I'm intrigued. What happened?
So like, things were a lot different back then. I'll tell you how old this is. This was when people used to talk about the information superhighway of the internet, right? That's what we're talking about. So it wasn't really commercialized. Most places that use the internet it was an academic research thing, right? And back then, hacking wasn't the most popular thing. A thing called phreaking was, which is to get free phone calls, right? Because you could talk to your friends. And so like I watched this film called War Games, and I was like, this is amazing. This idea that you could take a computer, which at that point, it blows my kids' minds, but like these days when you think about what you're using your phones for and all your internet devices, they're all connected, right? It's actually a social thing. But back then, using a computer was a totally solitary thing. No one had a modem. Very few people did. I didn't even know a modem existed, and I watched this film. And then there's this idea that you could take your computer and you could get it to call up another computer. And with that, you could do things. It was like this amazing thing. So that got convinced me to bug my dad to buy me a modem. And then I used to go on things called BBSs because that was the kind of the precursor to the internet, like local BBS, bulletin board systems, and that got me into hacking. And then like hacking was nowadays you can look up anything on the internet, but that then even tiny piece of information was like amazing. And all the really cool systems were risk-based architectures, which were like Sun OS and Solaris. And like, if you couldn't buy these things, they're incredibly expensive. So as a kid, it's like you would go hack these things to go mess around on them and stuff like that. And I was like, that's what got me into it. I was really into sort of like messing around on these new systems. And there was no money in the internet. But then there was this trendy thing of like sort of like exploring these systems. And I explored this. I hacked the BBC using not the Beeb, RPC Stat D, I think it was, some exploit like that, some Solaris exploit, and then weirdly enough, I got caught. But the reason I got caught was strange because there was two famous British hackers. I don't know if they still are around. I don't know anything about them. I haven't talked about them I haven't towards them in 20 plus years. Those two guys called Coldfire and Phobos. And allegedly, I'm not sure if it's, I wouldn't hate to say if it's true or not, or implement anyone or anything. Allegedly, they'd hacked New Labour's website. This is just when Tony Blair became New Labour. And they'd hacked the website and put New Labour saying lies and changed the images of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair to their spitting. If you're British, you would know what spitting image is. Well, no.
Yeah.
If you're British over the age of a certain age, you would know. And they did this, and apparently that had upset some people because it was rare to get arrested for hacking. It was very rare that anyone. It wasn't cyber criminal like it is today. It's not about getting money. So allegedly they'd done this. Well, some hackers had done this, and the hackers who had done that had used the same ISP I had, and they thought I was part of that group. When they found out I wasn't, then I was just some kid, and it was like a slap on the wrist. Like I got an official caution, but it got in the newspaper because especially then, like hacking was like this weird thing, and it's like some kid gets arrested, and that got me a job at Sega because they were looking to roll out something called Dream Arena, and they were looking for someone to help them with that, and that got me my interview and got me my job. And there's when I started to learn to program properly for computer games. And so it was just a weird confluence of events that got me my dream job at like 16, 17, and then I went back to university, and then then I went back to computer games, and then I decided I didn't want to do computer games anymore.
And now you're in cybersecurity. Wow, that's very, very cool. Probably, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but you're obviously a Reality Defender now. Reality Defender monitoring the deepfake space, which I think is such a big topic. It's so hot right now. I knew it was going to be like, I knew deepfakes were a concern when my grandma told me that she saw Holly Willoughby and Martin Lewis from Money, again, quite an English thing to say, but talking about this new bank account where you can put £400 in, you get £20,000 out. Yes. And she told me about, I was going around seeing her, and she told me about this, and I said, that doesn't sound right. Anyway, I looked it up, and it turned out to be a scam. She didn't understand, but it was like, she couldn't fathom how that had happened. And we just like brushed over it. But how did you know that deepfakes were going to be such a big issue?
I think the thing that appealed to me is like, the real scary stuff is when you take when something for granted that's taken for granted is no longer true. So when you think about it, and speak back to a very British-centric thing, think about mad cow's disease, right? When something is as solid and as unsexy as beef became untrusted, right? And so when you think about the world that we live in, seeing and hearing is believing. People tell you not to, but think about the court system, videotaped evidence. Well, when we talk about tape confession, we talk about some policeman sitting there with a tape recorder recording your voice, right? That was inherently the trust boundary. And that's fundamentally not the trust boundary anymore. You cannot believe that. And that's the power of technology. Technology can change the world in a day, but here's the rub. The world doesn't change in a day. And so how do you cope and live in a world which is almost post-reality, where you cannot believe what you see or hear, or even worse, well, not even worse, but like it adds this doubt where there's even a repudiation issue, which is very rare in cybersecurity, which is like someone did something but then denied it and has plausible deniability. Why? Because they said it's a deep fake. And so now the world is fundamentally shifted, and how do you combat that? But it's not just how you combat that from the ground up, it's how do you combat that in a way that is consumable in all the existing processes and systems that currently exist in the world. And so that's what drew me to the idea of deepfake protection and the idea of AI manipulation and how important it is, because it's taken something that was something that you grew up believing, and then it's fundamentally flipped on its head. And, you know, it's interesting to me because, like always, the young kids, my kids don't trust anything they see on the internet, right? They don't believe any of it, right? But grandmothers, mothers, even my wife texts me stuff and says, "Is this real? Can you run this through?" Right? And so it's like, how do you combat that? And that's what drew me to the idea of deepfake protection and the fact that it's a real need, right? It's a difficult need to tackle. And so that drew me to this world. So, yeah.
And that's a really interesting point where you said that your kids really don't believe anything they see now or hear. What do you think is the wider impact on just society, all this like fake news and like post-reality world we live in?
I mean, I think that's one of the interesting aspects is like from a sort of zeitgeist standpoint or from a social standpoint, what that world looks like. That's a very difficult question to answer. But what I do know now is that your trust boundaries fundamentally shifted. And so now it's really about verifying everything you see and you hear, right? I think that's the world that you have to live in. I think you have to have technology that can help you justify that to verify and at the scale and at real time where you need it. Because otherwise, it was not particularly trusting world before. It's an even less trusting world now, right? And I think that, and I do think there's one part of this which I think you can touch on sporadically, like there's nothing inherently evil around the idea of AI generated sort of media or artifacts. AI generated media is a tool. AI generation is a tool, right? And you can talk about the good or ills of it, but it is a tool, and it's a tool that has an impact on the world. So it's not that saying that you can't trust anything that's AI manipulated, but you should be able to know that it's AI manipulated as you view it to then be able to make a decision for yourself on that, right? And I think that's the important bit, is the knowledge to be able to say that, hey, this isn't real or this has been significantly changed. And then you can use that as your basis of judgment because there's no other way of doing it now, right? And as I said, it's one of the few things in cybersecurity where repudiation is important, just as important as AI manipulation, right? And we hear time and time again, "Hey, this is a deep fake," and it's like, was it or not? And you see it to sort of talk about how the prevalence of this has become. This is a $3,000 laptop that your kids use for gaming. That can real-time generate this stuff, real-time generated. And it's commoditized to that point now. So when you think about it, I talk to financial institutions. Financial institutions typically would not record any meetings or voice conversations unless contractually obliged to do it. That's no longer the case. When you ask them why, it's because of the deepfake problem. They have so many people, asking them or talking about certain things, and then they come back and say, well, actually, that wasn't me, or, and then it's like, well, how do you even verify that, right? And so this is the idea, is that now you see people recording these things in order to go back and do incident analysis and do those sorts of things, which would be unheard of before. And that's because of the scale and scope of what you see. And that's where something like, Reality Defender comes in and gives you at that moment that, hey, you are talking to a deepfake, or this is an AI manipulation, is vitally important, right? And it has to be timely as well, right? Because by the time 2-3 hours are gone, the damage is done. So it's an interesting aspect from that side of things as well.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting point that you made where deepfakes aren't inherently bad. I'm sure they have, can't think off the top of my head, but I'm sure they've got plenty of positive applications, but it's the intent behind it, right? Same with ransomware. I mean, ransomware isn't inherently bad. Like, actually what it does is actually quite useful, can be, but if it's the intent of it, like if the intent of it is bad, then yeah, they're not good. How do you verify if a video is deepfake or not?
This is always an interesting one. So like the way this works is, and it actually goes back to computer games. One of the weird things people find is when people want to make real physical simulations of the world, they don't use computer game engines. and everyone's asked why, and they usually start using a computer game engine because a graphics engine, because why wouldn't you, right? Because you think games try and make things photorealistic. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to computer games, the job of a computer game engine is not to make something material to simulate real world. The job of a computer game engine is to create a world that passes to a human as real. So there's lots of things it does which it doesn't really physically map lighting, doesn't even when you talk about things like ray tracing, the way that works, it's the actually opposite of how these things usually work. Photon mapping doesn't really work. But the idea is it's good enough to fool a human. And so when you think about what deepfakes are, so to create a foundational model, you need staggeringly large amounts of compute and vast quantities of data. The amount of data that realistically only comes about of the confluence of a few very large corporations or state-sponsored. Now, there's only two real, maybe not, but there's probably two nation states that could really create incredibly convincing deepfakes, right? Because that's the amount of data you would need to create them. So realistically, what happens is people take models that exist, foundational models, that are built not to create for fraud, but just like computer game engines, are used to fool a human to thinking something. Why? Because they're made for TV adverts, they're made for things along those lines, for generative media, right? And so they use those to create these fraudulent attacks. Now, they're good enough for a human, but there's lots of things in them that aren't that to do with entropy, to do with how the world works, that they aren't judged on, so they don't do very well. Which to a human doesn't matter, because especially when it comes to your eyes, you fill in most of the blanks anyway, your brain does. And so we see those things in transients, we see those things in the entropy, we see those things, and that's what we judge on. Because there's a fitness mismatch between how human judges an image or a video is real or not, compared to actually real physical mapping and real artifacts in a video that would happen in the real world or not. That's where you tend to see these things. And even your brain, when you think about, not so much the new generations, but you can see that on what they call the uncanny valley, which is, some people, when you say to them, why do you think that's fake or not? They're like, it's almost too perfect. It's almost too, like those sorts of, like that's the beginnings of what we are talking about, right? And so when you go to very fine grained controls, inherently in the analog world is incredibly messy. Well, the one that computers generate, it's actually incredibly expensive to do incredibly messy. So they're not incredibly messy. They're just messy enough to make a human believe that they're real or not. And that's where the suspension of disbelief comes in. So,
wow.
I mean, and even when you look at CGI, still frame by frame, it's like, actually, it's kind of not, right?
Yeah.
Like you kind of know, right? And it's that, that type of thing. So
but on that, right? I mean, like, it's evolving so quickly. Like for example, I watched Hocus Pocus the other day, right? It's that time of year, watched Hocus Pocus, there's some CGI in that, and you look at it now and you go, it's terrible, really bad. But back when I was a kid, or however, whatever, I thought that was, so real, and it terrified me. I was scared of witches for 10 years. But what I'm trying to say is that where it is now is obviously isn't going to be where it is in 5 years. Is there a way to be proactive about it, or do you have to be reactive?
So, I mean, the one aspect of that, where we come in, is the fact that they aren't designed for the same thing.
Right.
And then unless you build a fundamental model from the ground up, the idea of I'm going to create this to be fraudulent. Not fraudulent as in I want to convince a human, but to be like, I want to create a physically mapped world that has all the artifacts that world would have in that scene and that person would have to that level, to be able to convince someone from a transient point of view that that's it. And to create those foundational models is just out of scope, right? They just don't. And so that's where the differential is. And the reason for it is because people create these models not they're there to create something that will convince a human that what they're watching is real, not to convince a banking system or a fraud detection system that is real. And I think that's where the differential will be. And so that's where you see things, right? And you'll carry on seeing things, because especially when you talk about things around entropy and around the messiness of the world, there is no objective reason to do that in these models that aren't fraudulent. Right? I mean, like, if you look behind you, you'll see a wall that has a cornucopia of different imperfections that you will never see. Entropy that's not uniform. You see all these sorts of details, which a model would just never want to recreate, because there's no point in it. As a human, you wouldn't look at those things unless you really needed to notice them. And so I think that's where you see the differential. And there are also, when you talk about the characteristics of generative AI, there are certain characteristics of generative AI which are inherent in there, which you can see, or which a computer can see, that you wouldn't as a human understand. So there's aspects to this which is, it's a very complicated subject, and there's lots of edge cases.
Sure.
But that's real driving point of that sort of aspect.
It's quite poetic that it's our imperfections that separate us from this.
The world is literally a messy place.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's messy in a non-uniform manner, which is one of those things, right? So,
you're deep in the deepfake space right now. It's being used at the minute for things like sextortion and voice-based scam and all these sorts of things. Do you think there's anything that we need to be wary of that hasn't happened yet that it could be useful?
I think one of the most interesting aspects that people aren't talking about is, like, look, we live in a world where the digital world and the corporeal world is at a sort of confluence point, where more and more machines are interacting in some day lives. I mean, I used to live in Austin. There are Waymos. There are machines that deliver food takeout. When you look at the warscape, when you look at what Ukraine did in Russia with the airfields, these are autonomous drones that went and targeted planes and attacked them, right? They're all fully autonomous. So we're now living in a world where there's more and more AI-based platforms that are making decisions based on inputs without human interaction. And so what happens when someone takes the inputs from those machines and feeds them deepfake signals? So when you're talking about a drone, what happens if I feed it in the wrong LiDAR and the wrong images? What does that mean? Someone does it to a Waymo, someone does it to a robotaxi, someone does it to a delivery service. What does that mean and what input that is? And that's where I think, where the idea of deepfakes becomes almost a lot more, not sinister, but slightly more scary. And, when you talk about it, like when we talked about that Ukraine issue, the Russians put ties around the planes to make them look like from a silhouette that they weren't planes, because they knew that automatic targeting systems which used AI could look at the plane and target it. And it didn't work, right? Now that's a very, very sort of like crude example. But when you think about more and more autonomous systems relying on inputs that come from this, what happens when those inputs are deliberately and maliciously attacked? What does that impact mean? You talk about ransomware. The ransomware is in certain, like, they're really scary, like the dystopian, which, I always hate to go to this because, when you talk about cybersecurity, it's always, we're talking about this dystopian world, right? But like the ransomware that's more worrying is the ransomware that encrypts files on your OT device. I mean, that is scary, don't get me wrong. The ransomware is more of like what happens if Waymos are told that there's not a car there when there is, right? What happens if the LiDAR data is generated in a different manner, right? All these types of questions become more impactful when you think about the fact that we rely on these systems and we rely on them having real signal, and what happens when the real-time generation of that signal is not real anymore. And so that's where you see some interesting aspects. And I think that's where you want to see a confluence of events. But as everything becomes more intelligent, everything has an attack vector. And anything like that, that's inherently has an impact on the world.
Well, scary.
Yeah, as I said, it's always a dystopian thing. Look,
Thanks,
I
Alex.
can give you that example. Let me give you an example which is much more funny, right?
Go ahead.
Like, let's say, like, look, agentic AI. So I don't know if you call up a call center and you probably, there's a good chance now that you're going to be talking to an agentic AI.
Sure.
Right? Now, for good or ill, I'm not going to say, but one of our customers has agentic AI in their call center, and their problem is they have their customers use agentic AI. Why? Because people don't want to call up a call center, so they have an agentic AI do it for them. And so one of the more funny stories is their problem is when an agentic AI talks to another agentic AI, they have a problem because this particular customer has where they quibble over quotes and prices.
Right.
And so they have a problem where they have these cool phone calls now which are 3-4 hours long because it's one AI talk to another AI quibbling down to the quarters and pence, right? Mm-hmm. Cents and pence. And so this is as generative AI becomes more permeates society, there is this aspect again, which is it's not necessarily it's a good or bad thing, but it's a world where you have to understand it because it turns out you really don't want an agentic AI talking to another agentic AI because you end up DDoSing your own call center because they quibble for normal humans would be like, oh, I don't care, it's an extra pound. But an agentic AI is like, no, I'm going to consume vast quantities of tokens until it gets down to what it needs to get down to. And I think that's an interesting sort of idea as well. Like the world is fundamentally shifted with generative AI for good or ill. It's a tool and people are going to use it for good or people are going to use it for ill. It's so, we have to be prepared for the attacks, but there's also, there's just unforeseen circumstances that will come from these types of technologies, which you just don't know yet. So,
are you an AI optimist or not?
I always worry when people talk about tech first. Don't get me wrong, I am a nerd, so I love talking about this. But the truth of the matter is, look, what generative AI is a tool, just like blockchain was a tool and other things a tool. And there are two fundamental questions you've got to ask yourself. The first question is, what could we not do before that we can do now with this technology? And then what weren't problems before, which now are problems with this technology? I think those are the questions you need to ask. Look, are we close to an advanced general intelligence? I don't think LLMs will get you there. I'm happy to be proved wrong. But I think we are a ways away from that type of thing. Generative AI in particular is an area where you see a lot of people going very gung-ho on it, and you see a lot of those people backing down from it because it's one of those areas where it's one of those, right now with LLMs, it's one of those areas where you have to accept the fact that there's a good chance that, there is a percentage amount of time where it's going to get it wrong. Because it's, you say it's non-deterministic, it runs on a computer, so by definition it's deterministic, but it's as non-deterministic as a deterministic machine can be. And so that means every once in a while it's going to make a decision that boggles the mind. Mm-hmm. And so there are a few places where you have to, that's the tool you have, and you have to understand that you're going to leverage a tool that can make the decision wrong. And so when it comes to important decisions, impactful decisions and things like that, that's probably not a place that you currently would want an AI making that decision or an unchecked AI making that decision. So I am neither optimistic or contrarian on it. It's the way the world is moving. So
great answer. But no, you're right there, aren't you? I know people are using this example oh my God, ChatGPT's agentic function that it has now, you can book a holiday with it. Who's really going to let spend thousands?
And impactful. And here's the other thing: is when people talk about AI is when I did my degree in AI, even the definition of AI was very difficult to nail down because what we call now, when everyone says AI, what they really mean is generative AI right now, and even then, really, what they're talking about LLMs, and LLMs don't reason the same way a human reasons. Like they don't work the same way. There's lots of things about context windows and stuff like that, and so but they on the surface work similarly enough that sometimes they can give you a false sense of security in the decisions that they make. And I think as people get more used to them, we'll find that yes, I wouldn't book a holiday with agentic AI yet, right? But everyone has their own risk profile, and I would hate to start. You do you, right? So it's up to you.
Do you think there's a concern? Obviously, we need to lean on AI for cybersecurity because the other side is using AI, right? So you need to like fight fire with fire in a way. Do you think there's a concern that people will lean too much on AI and it becomes dangerous?
No, I don't necessarily worry about that side of things. I think also like if you're leveraging AI, how you leverage AI is very important. Like cybersecurity is one of the few fields which is inherently adversarial, right? So it's a world where it's always going to be cat and mouse. I think there are certain aspects of where AI will absolutely be a game changer. Cyber attacks leverage the idea of a cyber attack. The successful cyber attacks, when you talk about social engineering and things and what AI can do, that is one side. But the other aspect of it as well is attackers are looking for a path that no one's ever thought of before. Well, LLMs typically tread the path that's most trodden. So there's that aspect of things which you have to worry about. But the other aspect of things where I think AI will have a profound impact is when you think about, kill chains and you think about particularly like things like the OODA loop. When you think about OODA loop, the biggest part of your day as a cybersecurity guy is gathering the context. You have to pull it in from a whole bunch of places. Things like agentic AI, things like that can have a profound impact on getting information that's needed around a subject to a guy who's going to make a critical decision in a time and a manner which before you just couldn't do. You couldn't even begin to do. So I think there are aspects around that's going to have a profound impact. That's probably more going to have a profound impact than necessarily, hey, it's going to make all these decisions for you. It's definitely going to help, like, be able to get context windows, understand what some of these things mean. There are definitely aspects to that, I think, where it's going to help for sure. And the other aspects is around the sort of low-level stuff that you would do, from a security standpoint, which I think is going to have a profound impact. But I think the idea that it's going to take on a security researcher's role, I think we are a ways away from that being the case. And my worry about that is, as I said, good attacks take the path that no one's thought of before. Look at the target attack. Look at SolarWinds attack, things like that. Would an agentic AI be able to spot those things and understand those things? Probably not. They were, the attacks are by definition the exception to the rule. Having an AI, I think a human is the person who can join those dots. Like when I look at probably the first major attack, I'm again dating myself. There's a book called Cuckoo Egg. It's about hackers that were hired by the Russian government, and the way that they were discovered was a 7 cents discrepancy in their billing software. Think about that. Would an LLM be able to discover those guys? I doubt it, right? Would most humans discover that? No, you need to have that cantankerous, slightly ocker mind of a hacker or someone who's a security researcher to understand what that is and push those limits, which an LLM would struggle with. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah.
To talk about Reality Defender a little bit more, because there's a lot of businesses out there that are protecting organizations from, and civilians from, deepfake scams and all these sorts of things. How are Reality Defender doing it differently? And I don't want you to give me an elevator pitch. I'm sorry, it sounds like that. But
I think so. A lot of those guys are actually leveraging us. So what we are and what we specialize in is we're what's called a provenance-free, context-free, real-time or near real-time deepfake detection platform. So the idea here is like you can send us or stream us a piece of media or an artifact, image, document, voice, video, and we will tell you within a couple of seconds if it's AI manipulated or not.
Got you.
And there's no human in the loop. So we can do it at a scale that makes it that we're talking about millions of events we can scale to. Talking about call centers, you're talking about we do things literally on that scale, scanning the entire internet. If someone wanted to send everything to us, we do it. And there's no human loop, and it gives you that thing. It gives you that instant feedback. And then what we have is an API and SDK, which means in 2 lines of code, you can get the best of breed deepfake detection in near real time. And so that's what we do. Now we have some customer facing things along that side of things. We have a web app, and we have like a Teams integration and Zoom integration. But really our bread and butter is when you think about at very large scale, those guys who need that, or those guys who want to offer that as a service, they leverage us because we're easy to embed, 2 lines of code, and you get that sort of deep tech with 2 lines of code, and that's what we do. So a lot of those services that you see either leverage us or they try and leverage it through open source models, and the problem with open source models is there's a lot of bias, and when that bias comes up, and it's usually not a great bias because they inherently have some prejudices just because of the data sets they've used, right, to make an open source model, then they tend to come to us because this is what we do, right? So that's where we're at. So we drive a lot of even a lot of people who you think would be our competitors actually leverage us under the hood because this is just what we do. So,
and when you're going out and speaking to organizations or these other businesses that leverage your products, I assume maybe a year or 2 ago, there was an element of like educating people on the seriousness of this issue.
Yeah.
Have you found over the last, how long have you been at Reality Defender for now?
Just over 6 months, I think.
Oh, okay, cool, okay. Have you found it grow exponentially in terms of people approaching you for this sort of stuff?
I think there are 2 things. One is because we have a free API tier, we see a lot of people who are interested in this that can easily now leverage us. But I think the other aspect of things is, look, there was a time when a deepfake attack was a deepfake, which was a specialized thing that would happen. And you'd read about some CFO being conned out of 20 million and things like that, right? What has happened is when you ask what the most successful form of cybersecurity attack is social engineering by far. Thinking about the most famous hacker, probably Kevin Mitnick, rest his soul, and he was a social engineering hacker, right? So it's convincing people to do things. So now what you've found is that attack vector with this highly commoditized way of pretending to be someone, whoever you want to be, has now entered the lexicon of cybercriminal attacks. And so you just see it everywhere. And it's not just the sort of, hey, give me money, but it's much more about, when you talk about sort of data exfiltration, when you talk about, password exfiltration, when you talk about east to west migration, when you talk about, OS in gathering, all these things now leveraging deepfakes. And suddenly we've seen a massive influx because it's gone from the exception to the rule to a well-known attack pattern that cyber criminals will leverage. And I think that change in the lexicon has really fueled a lot of interest in this space because it's just become to near endemic levels because of it. And I think that's actually happened noticeably in the last 6 months that I've been here. So it's been interesting for that side of things.
So Reality Defender recently expanded Series A to, I might get this wrong. How much, sorry?
I cannot remember off the top of my head. So those 3 things. So altogether, we've raised, a significant seed and Series A. Yes.
Congrats.
So thank you.
How are you deploying that capital to stay ahead of deepfake issue?
I think one of the things that people don't get is that we are like around a 50-man team, a 50-person team. 33 of those people work straight up report to me. 36 of those people report to me, and most of their team is AI PhDs.
Oh, wow.
So we do straight up deep tech. We have a whole bunch of patents in the space, but also if you go to any major conference around the generative AI, around deepfake detection, you'll see papers written by us. You'll see us presenting. So we are a straight deep tech company, and we we do that. Now, we make it very easy to consume the deep tech, but our biggest push is as a research arm that generates this sort of work. So, yeah.
Wow. And okay, so the next 6 to 12 months, I know you've only been here 6 months. The next 6 months, what can we expect? Anything to see?
You'll see all sorts of different launches or different partnerships that you'll see. I can't talk about it because I'm going to get in trouble. But yes, you'll see some interesting things. As I said, like the big launch that we had with Black Hat was the free tier. So anyone who wants to create a deepfake detection app, anyone who wants to, put it into their platform, even for free, there's an API there. Even if you're just a kid who wants to kick the tires of it, you're more than welcome to. It's there for sure. And we're seeing lots of interesting tracks and that sort of things. And then, yes, there's lots of things being launched. Which I can't talk about yet, but yes, busy.
Love that.
Yeah.
The last question. If you had to have one kind of quote or piece of advice, middle of Times Square, all around cybersecurity, that everyone can see, what would be on that billboard?
Understand and rate your trust boundaries. Actually, there'll be two. One, if you're in a productionized environment, I will tell you this. Align your security with your engineering group, not the other way around. And then if you're talking about the environment as a whole, I would say understand your trust boundaries and understand how you verify your trust boundaries.
Ooh.
Which is a very nebulous answer, but there you go.
Love it. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Right, you need to go.
It was a pleasure. Well, it was a pleasure seeing you guys, and thank you very much.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next one.